All right, I'd like to welcome everybody out this morning, beautiful day, to the Utah Lake Commission meeting. What I'd like to do to start is just to determine who is present physically, and then we'll do a roll call, have Sam do a roll call to see who is available virtually. And so I'm just going to have Sam go through the list. And if you would just, we'll give you a little time to unmute and respond, and then have you mute back up. So go ahead, Sam.
So if it's okay with you, Mayor Frost, I've actually noted everybody that I've seen. There are a couple phone numbers, so I'd like to just read through those I have marked down. And if you are not on the list I read, if you could please speak up so that we can know who's here. I have Lon Lott with Alpine, Brad Frost with American Fork, Brian Cottam and Jamie Barnes from Forestry, Fire, and State Lands, Chris Karn from Saratoga Springs, Lori Backus from State Parks, and Carrie Malkovich from Woodland Hills. Is there anybody else on the line that is one of our board members that I missed?
Kim, this is Erica Gaddis from Water Quality.
Thank you, Eric. Eric, are you the phone number ending in 87 that dialed in?
Got to go through her phone number. What is my phone number?
Okay.
Oh, yeah, 87.
Okay, perfect. All right. Just wanted to make sure I was recognizing who was there. So Erica, and then it looks like Brian Steed just joined. Welcome, Brian.
Good to see you. Thanks.
And that looks like everybody we've got on there right now. So that puts us at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 board
And
members.
Mike.
So we are.
Do we have a
Who am
quorum?
I missing? Oh, Mike Mills. My apologies. 9, not 8.
Does that give us a quorum?
So we're still on the shy side, so we could.
Okay, we'll have
Through
to,
some of
we'll
the
have
other
to
things.
move around on the agenda a little bit. So that gives us 9 board members, presently not a quorum, so I'm going to move around on the agenda just a little bit and skip the action items, and we'll come back to that with the hopes that we can add a few more people to the meeting. So
What is a quorum?
that's a good question.
12.
12? Okay. So we're looking for a magic number of 12, currently at 9.
Yeah, you can grab a seat.
So, oh, sorry. So I'm going to move to item number 3, is the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program presentation by Mr. Mike Mills.
Sam, did you get Rebecca Andrus?
Doesn't matter where I stand.
Yes, she's no longer. You are okay there. Sorry, give me 1 second. Try and get your presentation slides pulled up.
Or you could stand right behind us as well, and then
Okay.
the
Yeah.
computer would see you.
Correct. I think it's a good idea.
If that's what he wants, that sounds good. Thank you. Okay, Mike, you should be good to go.
Okay. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. It's a pleasure to be here, to be able to give a quick update on activities of the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program, especially under these unique times that we live in. And usually when we come and give these reports, it's to a room full of people, but like everybody, we're dealing with these new circumstances, and hopefully there's some good information here for everyone, and hopefully something new that you haven't heard before. Just some background for those that might not be familiar. This is the endangered June sucker, found only in Utah Lake, the only place in the world where it occurs naturally. It's named, sometimes people wonder why it has kind of that funny name. It's named after its spawning run that occurs each early summer in June, although over the last decade it seems to be trending earlier and earlier, and we have more and more fish that show up in May as opposed to June. Named a sucker because of its mouth shape, although it's not like a true sucker that feeds on the bottom of a water body. It's what we call a lake sucker. It feeds up in the water column, kind of has a mouth a little bit different from your traditional sucker. And it is one of 3 species of lake sucker that remain in existence in the world. Was listed as endangered in 1986 due to a variety of threats, including modifications to spawning habitat, introduced species, and then the overharvest mentioned there was actually due to an incident of vandalism that occurred in 1984 when people over the weekend came in and actually destroyed some net pens that were in the bottom of the Provo River and killed June sucker that were being held for a captive breeding attempt. And in total, there were about 30 June suckers, 17 females, 14 males that were killed in that incident. And it's believed that that was one of the triggers that caused the Fish and Wildlife Service in 1986 to list the species as endangered. So after it was listed, there really wasn't a lot of change in how things were managed. The state, the Division of Wildlife Resources, did start to take June sucker into captivity and begin captive breeding efforts. But it wasn't until 1994 when the Fish and Wildlife Service issued a biological opinion to the Bureau of Reclamation for the Provo River project, which involves Deer Creek Reservoir. The incident happened, some June sucker had swam up the Provo River in order to spawn, and flows were cut for irrigation, and some individual fish ended up dying, and the belief was that's what triggered the biological opinion to be issued. But at that point forward, that was really a game changer for water users because it meant increased pressure on the Provo River supply, and now all of a sudden this endangered species had the potential to interfere with the water supply, not something that we thought would be good. Especially given the precedents that existed across the western United States where conditions with other endangered fish had caused some big conflicts. The most popular example is Klamath Falls up in Oregon, where water has been mandated to stay in the river, taking it away from water users, and the public outcry for that was pretty loud. Other examples involve the Sacramento River in California, but it's kind of a history of conflict involving endangered species, especially endangered fish, and the potential impact they can have on a water supply. So not wanting to experience that same thing in Utah and with the Provo River, the water users got together with the Department of Natural Resources, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and created what became known as the June Sucker Recovery Implementation Program. It contains state, local, federal agencies, and it exists for the purpose of providing compliance with the Endangered Species Act. Has two goals. One is to recover the species so it no longer requires protection under ESA, and also allow for the continued use of water and development of water resources for human use along the Wasatch Front. We originally had 7 different agencies that all participated in this program. Each agency makes contributions, financial and in some cases in kind, into an account that funds recovery actions for the June sucker. We recently added the Division of Water Quality from the state of Utah. They joined the program last fall. As we'll hear later in the agenda, they're very involved in water quality research on Utah Lake. I imagine everyone's probably familiar with that at this point. And then outside of the agencies, we also have an outdoor interest representative that represents non-government organizations to the program. The whole idea behind this is patterned after similar programs in the United States, but basically the premise is if the program can make sufficient progress towards recovery of the endangered species, we don't face those threats against the water supply, and we're allowed flexibility in moving forward. We try to take an ecosystem approach to recovery, meaning we don't specifically focus on only June sucker-centric projects. We do everything from outreach, trying to do public education, up to habitat restoration projects and everything in between. As I mentioned, one of the threats to June sucker was an impact on the water supply. and those fish dying in the Provo River caught headlines, got a lot of attention, and represented the potential to continue to lose adult fish out of the population. And so one of the first things that the program did, even before the program was official, was start to augment flows in the Provo River to try to prevent that loss of adults. And so that action actually dates back all the way to 1995. And it was the Provo River Flow Work Group that got started back then and continues to operate today, that through the Central Utah Project Completion Act, the Department of Interior, working with the Central Utah Water Conservancy District, has been able to acquire almost 30,000 acre-feet of water to supplement flows in the Provo River and Hobble Creek to support June sucker spawning. It went from a project with the idea, okay, we need to stop the loss of adults, to now we're benefiting the ecosystem, we're actually providing enough water to really provide for recovery of this species. The other issue we were facing was at the time of the program being started, we were dealing with a very small population. We knew that there were fewer than 1,000 individuals left in the wild population. Our estimates of the breeding population was between 300 and 500 individuals. We were definitely on the brink of extinction for this species, although efforts were being made to raise them in captivity. So the other thing we had to do was build up the population. And this stocking program or captive rearing program has really been part of the backbone of the program, together with the water that's being provided, to really provide a basis for recovery of this species. It wasn't easy when we first got started trying to raise these fish. We had no idea what we were doing. The fish we were producing were not high quality. They had many deformities and really struggled to survive in Utah Lake. It wasn't until we had a dedicated hatchery facility constructed in Logan where we could really ramp up our production. You'll notice these last few years that production has dropped off again. It's not that we've forgotten how to raise good fish. We found that a larger fish survives much better in the wild. So rather than producing 100,000 8-inch fish, we now focus on trying to produce about 25,000 12-inch fish for stocking back in Utah Lake. And they survive much better than the smaller fish we were stocking earlier. So together, those two projects really, like I mentioned, built the basis for the program. And we've gone from a population that was in the hundreds to where if you go down to the Provo River during the June sucker spawning run, you can see schools of dozens of June sucker down there spawning. This was a year where conditions worked out pretty well. In about mid-May, walking along the Provo River Trail, you could see groups gathered around, looking at fish in the river, wondering, what are those things? And when you go up and tell these people that's an endangered species, it's hard for them to fathom because they can see so many individuals right there. Like, how can this species be endangered when I'm looking at possibly 100 of them right there? And it's because of the success of that stocking program that we've been able to reverse the trend and bring the number of individuals back up in the population. That said, even though we have all those adults spawning and they produce millions of larval fish, we do not find evidence of natural recruitment, meaning that eggs hatched in the Provo River, those little larval fish, don't survive to become adults. And so beginning in about 2010, we really made a transition of trying to do projects to allow those little fish the chance to survive. And one of the big issues out there are non-native fish. Common carp have been very destructive in Utah Lake. One of the projects that we get a lot of media coverage about has been the carp removal program that has reduced the density of carp in Utah Lake. We started this in the hopes of trying to see a recovery in the submerged vegetation in the lake that could provide refuge habitat for young suckers. It's still a goal we're working towards. We have seen really great reductions in carp density in Utah Lake, and really seen a shift in the size structure of the population out there. Another threat are northern pike, which were illegally introduced into Utah Lake in about, well, the first one we found was in 2010. This is a very voracious predator that has the capability of really altering or dramatically impacting all the fish populations that live in Utah Lake, not just June sucker.
Will there be any formal eradication of northern pike like there has been of carp?
It's difficult to know. We're working on a strategy right now. When we first found them, the thought was, okay, well, let's see if they take hold in Utah Lake. Let's see if they can even survive out there. We have found evidence of them reproducing and surviving. And so we're currently in the process of developing a strategy to try to address them. Even though we have commercial fishermen out there removing hundreds of thousands of pounds of carp, they struggle to find a northern pike. So the population is so low that to go out there and say we're going to remove them all, it's a needle in a haystack at this point. It's just so hard to find. But we're going to have to do something. And what exactly that looks like, we're not really sure yet. Yes, there will be something at some point, but I don't know what it will look like quite yet. An area that we've tried to focus on, again, in the last 10 years has been the restoration of habitat, especially focusing on the tributaries to Utah Lake and where they connect with the lake itself. These pictures are two different projects on Hobble Creek. The larger one is the restoration of the actual connection between Hobble Creek and Utah Lake. This project was completed in 2009, and we had no record of a June sucker using Hobble Creek, but one of the recovery criteria was that we develop a spawning area outside of the Provo River. And we selected Hobble Creek because the floodplain was relatively undeveloped. It gave us room to work, and also we had the ability to augment flows in this particular tributary. So the project wrapped up in December of 2008. We did reseeding, moving into the spring. By June 2009, we had a few hundred June sucker spawning in Hobble Creek. Really was impressive that they found it that quickly and that they were able to successfully spawn. So we've continued that project moving upstream, where we've tried to enhance spawning habitat and improve conditions in the river itself. And so we've tried to take those same principles we learned on Hobble Creek and move that over to the Provo River. So I mentioned hundreds of fish spawning in Hobble Creek. We have thousands of fish that spawn in the Provo River, but the habitat conditions there are not good for supporting those larval fish. And so this Provo River Delta Restoration Project, this is the largest habitat restoration project we've attempted. It's just over 250 acres and will restore the connection between the Provo River and Utah Lake. Just to maybe orient anybody who's wondering where this is Utah Lake State Park. Provo City Center Street runs along the bottom of this map, and then the existing Provo River is right through here. This project just got started. We began site prep work back in March. One of the issues was the standing water that was out on site. This area used to be part of Utah Lake. There are a lot of springs, and it's kind of a vast wetland complex out there. So we had to pump 24/7 just to try to lower the water table enough to allow construction activities to get moving forward. We actually officially broke ground on the project here in the last couple of weeks. Last Thursday, we released this groundbreaking video. Our original plans were to have a groundbreaking celebration, but due to the conditions with COVID-19, we weren't able to do that. If you haven't seen the video, go to the website, provoriverdelta.us, and it's about It's a little under 15 minutes long, but it's worth watching, at least to me. It kind of explains the project and talks about our goals moving forward. We had great participation from our partners and had a lot of officials that were willing to speak and be a part of this video, which we really appreciate. The project will take about 5 years to complete. In addition to providing habitat for June sucker, there are several recreational amenities that will be part of this. We're going to construct a viewing tower here on the south boundary, improve trails down through the area. We'll be constructing a city park that will be managed by Provo City moving forward. It will be called the Provo Delta Gateway Park. We'll have a couple of different access points and trailheads. We think it's going to be a big benefit to the community. Like I said, we're hoping to wrap this up in about 2024 to 2025. And then just to kind of finish off, back in November, the Fish and Wildlife Service released a proposed rule that would change the status of the June sucker from endangered to threatened. And this represents a big accomplishment, not only for the program, but for all of the partners that we work with. In the history of the Endangered Species Act, there's only been 4 fish that have been upgraded, so to speak, from endangered status to threatened. And we have a lot of hope that June sucker are going to be the 5th fish to make that jump. This isn't something that happens every day. This is a great accomplishment. And to think of the state that June sucker were in and the threats that were present, for us to be 20 years later and be at a point where we're talking about recovery of this species is a tremendous accomplishment. In those 20 years, we've been able to move forward with development of water. We haven't had to impact deliveries to customers. We have a water project that's nearing completion. We've seen population growth along the Wasatch Front. We like to think that we haven't let June sucker become a problem that has slowed down that progress. In fact, we've improved conditions for June sucker in the face of all this increased pressure and increasing threats on the species. So it's remarkable, and it's great to be able to be part of a program that has this accomplishment. And the Utah Lake Commission has helped us greatly. When the commission got started, we tried to educate everyone on June sucker and give them an idea of the things that needed to be taken into consideration so that it didn't impact projects moving forward. And the commission has really let out on a lot of things and really been the face of Utah Lake, which we really appreciate, and the outreach that they've provided has been instrumental in being a part of this process. So we appreciate the opportunity to present. I'd be happy to answer questions if there are any, but thank you.
Thank you. We'll have you stay right there, Mike.
Okay.
Is there any questions from those present or those that are virtually in the room?
Well, I'd just like to say that it's a great presentation, and after all the years of listening to you talk about it, it's nice to see the package is getting to where it's successful, and with the river project started, that even makes it a little more exciting too.
It definitely does. We're hopeful that proposed rule I mentioned will be finalized by the end of the year. It has to go through review at every level of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they have to address all the comments they've received. So we have our fingers crossed. And then projects like the Delta Restoration mean that 5 years from now, hopefully we're talking about a species coming completely off the endangered species list, which that would be a great accomplishment.
So on the Hubble Creek project then, have you seen an increase in spawning there? You mentioned the 2009 increase, but how does it look today?
Last year was our biggest year on Hubble Creek. We approached 1,000 fish spawning down there. It's been interesting. So I'm not sure we fully understand why they choose which tributary to go up, because our numbers on the Provo River weren't great last year. If you remember, we had really high flows on the Provo, much colder water probably. We think they actually preferred Hobble Creek last year to the Provo River. Whereas this year, that's kind of flopped again to where we were down on Hobble Creek to probably around 600 fish. And then on the Provo River, we were approaching 3,000. So it's been interesting. And then lake level, so Hobble Creek connects to Provo Bay, and as lake level drops, the access to Hobble Creek can be difficult for a fish. And so as we went through years with a low lake level, 2015 through 2018, our numbers in Hobble Creek really were low. But we saw that rebound really quickly when the lake came up in 2019. So I'm not sure we fully grasp why they're selecting which tributary, but we still see a lot of hope over there at Hobble Creek. All right, thank you.
Great information.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the board? Okay, just so I can kind of keep track of, is there any new people that have
We
entered?
do have a couple of phone numbers that signed on.
Let's see what we have.
So the two new numbers that I see end in 55 and the other one ends in 99. Those are board members. If you could just voice your name so that we know who is here to determine a quorum.
Hi, it's Mayor Kafuski. I'm the 99.
Thank you, Mayor Kafusi. Welcome. And then I think the other number ended in 55. Is that one of our board members, or it may be someone from the public listening?
This is Chris Finlinson, and I'm the 55 number.
Thank you, Chris. So she is matching for Mike Mills. So now we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're at 10.
10?
We can also do, shoot out an email and get a
Yeah.
verification afterwards.
Yeah, we'll do that. But I'm gonna have hope people will still come in. I'm just gonna keep going and we'll keep action items to the end.
Okay.
All right, we'll stay with the agenda. We'll skip off number 2 and hopefully we can get 1 or 2 more to jump on board. I don't know if we can get Eric on this, but item number 4, Executive Director's Report. I'm gonna turn the time over to Eric to do that.
Okay.
You can, sorry, real quick, while we're setting up the presentation, if anybody is not on mute, if they can make sure they're muted. We've had a little bit of feedback here in the room. Want to make sure everybody can hear clearly. Thank you. Oh, I forgot the screen share.
Okay. I'll just run through mine here real quick. The first item on that on the agenda is the census. I just wanted to let the group know that because the census was completed here recently, we're going to be looking at that over the next year. The way that the commission membership works is it's based on miles of shoreline and population. And so depending on how that impacted your community, that will change the formula next year to some degree. And so expect next year to see a little bit of movement up or down depending on what the population did in your community versus everyone else's community. And just wanted to make everybody aware of that. So I haven't seen the actual results. I know that we have a couple cities that are exploding in growth and some that stay nice and consistent.
Oh, Vineyard, aren't they like 4,000% or something?
Yes, since the last census, yeah. Okay, so we'd like to look through the annual report. I'll just skip over these. So this year's been an exciting year. We've been able to work with our partners and pull together some really impressive investments into Utah Lake this year. From the first page, $5.6 million in tourism funding. We've had amazing volunteers this year and conducted 49 cleanup efforts. And then as well, our restoration work along the shoreline has been very effective. We've been able to treat 5,500, almost 5,600 acres of the shoreline with 2 separate types of treatments. So phase 1 treatment, just over 4,000 acres of chemical treatment, and then just about 1,500 acres of mechanical treatment with the marsh masters that were purchased just over a year ago. The Utah Lake Shoreline Improvement Grant that you as a board approved last year for the commission to offer went off successfully. 2 candidates were selected. We were able to purchase, or at least in a great part, purchase a sand rake for Vineyard City. And they're just working on getting that set up. They've got a tractor ordered, and we're scheduled to be at the first use of that to see how it works. And we're excited to see a beach with actual turfed up sand to kind of see the response from all of those that are seeking beaches. And we know that in Utah, that's the one thing that we in great part lack, and so folks really congregate at those improved beach areas. The other project was at the Utah Lake State Park, and we were able to help with the purchase of some materials to improve their playground, to purchase weed killer, and then seed to reseed their campground. It had filled up with cheatgrass, and that was proving to be not the best ground cover for a campground. And so we got the report yesterday that has proven to be successful so far. They're probably going to have to reseed a little bit more next year, but by and large, it's working well. And then they were also able to get the funds to purchase gravel to resurface the largest jetty, so the south jetty that goes all the way west and then heads north again and kind of creates the enclosure. Anglers love to use that area to get out and fish, and it's been potholed for years, and so they're at the verge of doing that. They held off early in the spring because the lake was so high. They were concerned that it was going to flow over the dike, but now that the lake is dropping a little bit, they're getting onto that. And they were also able to add a water line with those funds to go across the river under the walking bridge, and to bring water out to their nature area in an effort to utilize that. They have kind of a nature walk area on the south side of the river that has not been used for quite some time, and so that'll be able to open that up for use as well. As far as current projects, 10 current projects that the Commission has been working with our partners on. American Fork Marina tourism expansion. That is one of the projects that received funding through the Tourism Tax Advisory Board. We worked with that board on 3 different projects. The American Fork Marina, Saratoga Springs Marina, and the Vineyard Beachfront. And so those projects combined were the $5.6 million. And then that also brings in match dollars for an additional close to $15 million. So we're very excited to see those move ahead, and we are working with them and the county in partnership to see some really exciting enhancements to those 3 different projects. There's also work being done at Linden Marina to enhance their campground. We talked about Utah Lake State Park, the Provo River Delta project that Mike talked about earlier. This is one that we work very hard to promote, but this is a project that has been Mike and the Utah Mitigation Commission and a number of partners have been working diligently on for how long now, Mike? 10 years? More?
probably a little more, but we started the NEPA process, the environmental permitting process in 2010.
Huh. Well, that is I don't, Mike somewhat touched on this, but he was being humble. That project will, while it benefits the June Sucker greatly, will really provide an area down near the state park that will be unrivaled. Beautiful trail on the north and south side of that project. It's what, almost 300 acre delta, so we'll have a wetland delta that folks can come down and walk and enjoy, ride their bikes along the edges of. It also preserves the existing Provo River corridor to create a community fishing pond and an enhanced area along that last 2 miles near the lake, just to the south side of Utah Lake State Park, that will also be improved beyond what it has been for decades and decades. So very fascinating project to follow over the next 5 years as that comes to completion. We talked about Phragmites treatments. Those are coming along well. Because the lake is really high right now, we will be able to treat as much or more. Just as an update, I don't know that we have it later in the agenda. This year's Watershed Restoration Initiative grant was fully funded, and then our Utah Department of Agriculture and Food, the Invasive Species Mitigation Fund, it had a small cut as a percentage cut to the amount that we had requested, but the combination of our WRI and that ISM grant will allow us to, with the high lake levels, to complete almost all that we had hoped to for Phragmites treatment and other invasives along the shoreline of Utah Lake. So that should be largely unimpacted. The Wakara Way project is moving ahead slowly but surely. This is the park, or natural space, open space park, just to the west of Orem, south of Vineyard, and north of Provo. We were not able to get the state funding. Unfortunately, that was cut as a result of the pandemic's impact on tax revenue this year for the state. But we were able to get some additional grants to start the project so that we can set up some of the fencing to do a pilot for the grazing effort and demonstrate how effective that is, and we'll be working on a number of different funding options for that in the coming year. Lastly, Sandy Beach. I don't know if we have a county representative here, but Forestry, Fire, and State Lands worked with Utah County and a private landowner, and for the last couple of years there has been a disputed parcel of land right down there at Sandy Beach that has finally been negotiated, and that's complete. The county ended up with I think all that they were hoping for as far as securing that entire Sandy Beach area as a public access point. There's funding set aside for that we were able to put aside a few years ago, and so we're excited to see that access point greatly enhanced. The road out to it is going to get improved, some parking, and then clearing all of the brush out there so that it opens it up and makes it a little bit more of a inviting environment. So we're excited to see that, and we'll report on that as progress is made.
With all of our recreational improvements, when does the county do their mosquito abatement? I can't remember. Because, I mean, that's a huge impact too of people going. And we can make it look pretty all we want, but if the mosquitoes are there, no one goes.
Excellent question. So we just spoke with the mosquito abatement group just a few days ago. They conduct their work throughout the year, so they're doing traps. They have traps set all around the lake to kind of gauge where the most mosquitoes, or where the worst problems are with mosquitoes, and then they treat accordingly. The more trails that we put in, the easier it is for them to access. But they have dialed in their treatments to the point now where they actually are using a drone to treat the larval mosquitoes along the shoreline in that kind of that ribbon right along where they are most likely to be born. And so they're treating mosquitoes there, and then they do more of the large-scale treatments where they see, in the wetland areas that are wider, they can fly it on and treat more that way. Oftentimes what folks are seeing is midges. And while midges are agreeably annoying, they're not a health hazard and they are not biting. So they're more just
Flying around
to us,
space.
they're a pest, but to birds, they're dinner and lunch and breakfast. So the mosquito problem, though, is definitely being addressed, and it's kind of an ongoing process. It doesn't, from my interaction with them, it did not sound like it is a single treatment. It is an around the year project to stay on top of it, and they continue to look for funding to make sure that they can get it done well. Trail sections, one last update on this page. 1,700, just over 1,700 feet of trail was installed along the frontage of Vineyard by Flagship Homes on a project. Really pretty section of trail that drops down close to the lakeshore. And then finally, after a number of years of work, Saratoga Springs was able to secure their permit for moving or creating a trail along the Amanda Lane Hot Pots area. So that this is one of those sections of canal over there that needs to be pulled back up against the bank of the edge of the lake, so that there isn't that little gap through there that is a mosquito problem. So we'll be meeting with them shortly to kind of get more details on how fast that moves ahead. Funding overall, the Utah Lake Commission budget, as it is representative of the funding that went into Utah Lake last year, 3.1%. So for every dollar that our commission members have provided, $33 this last year were able to come in to funding projects on Utah Lake, which is a huge return on that investment. We're excited to have support from our legislature through private dollars, and then also, and especially this year, through our county tourism taxes through the Tourism Tax Advisory Board. Outreach. Sam, did you want to talk a little bit about the outreach?
Yeah, I'd love to hit on a few things. So on this page, we wanted to spotlight some areas that have seen a lot of success in the last year. The Facebook page likes is one that's just kind of great because we've struggled to gain more likes. You can't proactively go follow people on Facebook. You kind of have to hope they come find you. So we're really happy to see that the number of likes on our Facebook page is up 121% from last fiscal year. A couple of percentages that are up, our photo contest submissions are up 266% from previous years. We typically, for the first couple of years, we're right in the 30s in submissions, and last year we had 104 submissions. And we're looking forward to another great year with that. One interesting one to do with what we suspect to do with the COVID-19 pandemic, the access points page on our website is up 159% in visits. We've gotten a lot of Facebook messages, a lot of phone calls, emails from people asking questions about if the lake is open, where they can go, what kind of activities they can do there. So we've been really happy to help people enjoy their social distancing down at Utah Lake. Volunteers was listed over there. We estimate about 150 volunteers across all of our events and programs this year, which is a significant increase over previous years. The podcast, the Utah Lake Facts Fiction Podcast, is one of our newest outreach efforts. When we created this report, we were at 17 episodes. This morning, we actually published our 19th episode. This number was at 1.9 thousand plays. I think we're just over 2,100 now, so we're definitely seeing a rise in interest in that. Also, because of COVID-19, we did a virtual field trip this spring in lieu of our normal in-person field trips with fourth graders. And we had a lot of great views on the 12 different videos, and we wanted to thank all of the various presenters who normally help us in person, who were very flexible with their schedules, to have me come record them and try and have that out there still for those students, because the teachers and students really valued our efforts to try and have that be a part of their routine, because they really look forward to that field trip every year.
Sam, was that just fourth graders?
Right now, we do offer the field trip only for fourth graders for two reasons. One, the curriculum was developed around the fourth grade curriculum. And two, capacity. All 12 or 13, depending on the field trip, presenters that come are basically donating their time to us. And they each see, each day, each presenter will see 6 fourth grade classes. And so if we were to expand it to additional grades, fifth grade, I've had a couple teachers reach out, even a second grade teacher recently. If we were to add in additional grades, right now, all that would mean would be a larger applicant pool, and still the same amount of people, or excuse me, the same amount of schools accepted to come to the field trips.
So now that we've done some virtual field trips, would we consider doing that for those younger grades, as it works up to when you're in fourth grade, you get to come for real, and just to get their excitement going and their understanding of what, so you're not starting from ground zero
Sure.
when they're fourth graders.
I think it's something we could definitely consider. I think we would have to look at how do we adjust according to what the curriculum might be. In fact, we're actually in the middle of a curriculum review for the science standards, which are being updated this fall for fourth grade.
Right.
And so we actually have to revise 7 of our 10 lessons in order to match with that updated curriculum. So I think we would need to go through something similar for other grades, but it's definitely a possibility.
Do we offer these field trips to fourth graders who are in charter schools and or homeschool?
Yes, it is open. Charter schools, yes. We have had a couple of homeschool groups reach out to us before. That's been usually, though, for a very small group, and they want to have something a little bit more flexible. So we've offered, but they haven't taken us up on the offer to do something a little bit more smaller scale, but cater to their needs. But charter schools, we usually have at least 2 or 3 charter schools apply every time we do the field trips.
We'll look into the earlier grade virtual type field trips. That's a great idea. As the Wakara Way project moves ahead, that's another location where we have the intention of hosting grades more on a sporadic basis, where they could come at any point in the year and go out and do a more, I don't know, in the wild type
Yeah, the
field trip.
Way, the Provo River Delta project, the state park, it seems to me where we want to get people to come there, and one of the ways is if you're engaging the children, and the parents want to say, well, where is that? I want to go see it, and pretty soon it becomes a tradition.
Agreed. We'll let you know how
research shows.
how we do on that.
Ideas.
It's a great one.
Also on there, for your convenience, we will send this out to the board afterwards, the digital version, but some objectives that we have with the outreach program to continue to improve it as we move forward.
Thank you, Sam. I think that's the end of our annual report. Wakara Way, we talked a little bit about this. I mentioned that we did not get our state appropriation. We just heard final word yesterday that the portion that had been appropriated was reversed, as was many of the new dollar appropriations from this year's Senate, or this year's session. We do have applications in for funding for the Wakara Way project with Mountain Land Association of Governments, through American Trails, and we also applied, the Governor's Office of Economic Development put a request out in the last few weeks for potential shovel-ish ready projects that the state is considering doing a bond for, a stimulus type bond to fund some projects throughout the state. And so we also put this project in that potential pipeline for funding that way as well. So that's where we are right now. We're seeking all options for grants, and so we'll keep our eyes open for them. And if anyone stumbles upon a grant offering that would be appropriate for trails and outdoor parks, open space type parks, please send that our way. We're looking for every potential funding option, as we'd like to get that project started sooner than later. Mountain Land Association of Governments, it looks like that is our best option right now. I think that we've ranked really high, and it'll likely, at least a phase of it will likely get funded through that. But those dollars are 3 or 4 years out, and can be, we could probably work those into completing additional phases if needed, if we can find other funding between now and then. And I mentioned that the fencing down there will begin this summer. We've already purchased a whole bunch of fence materials, and we'll get started on that come July, beginning of July, when we get our next year's funding to kind of complete that first pilot area. Live camera feeds. I think we've got a slide here. One of the big projects that this summer, as many of you heard in the news, we had 2 fatalities out on the lake, and it kind of got ideas rolling as to how we might make the lake a little bit safer. We probably can't change the wind, and we can't change the size of the openness of the lake, but one of the ways that we thought might be a helpful one for predicting safeness on the lake is providing live camera feeds at all of our marinas, so that when folks consider going down to the lake, they can check in on that, they can see what the lake conditions are like, they can check and see what parking conditions are like, so that they know that they're not going to show up at an overpacked marina. And then it would also provide some amount of security and traffic monitoring for those marinas. So we've reached out to all of our public marinas to get support from that. When we initially reached out, they were interested to know, is this something that the public actually wants? And so we conducted a poll, a survey, and 90% of the respondents, which is very statistically significant, it put it into the 83 to 90 or 86 to 94% range of all Utah County residents would be very supportive of having these live camera feeds. So we'll be putting in an application for funding for that. Really what it would require of the municipalities who run these marinas would be a little bit of power, and potentially at one location an internet source. And so far we've had really good response from those marinas. The state park was the first to respond back with an interest in that, and we'll report back as we if we're successful in finding the funding for that. The other is the idea, and this is just kind of the second page of that. Let's see, we were going to talk about, so I'll have Sam talk more about our Adopt a Shoreline, but before we do that, one thing that we brought up with our technical committee yesterday is the idea of doing a life jacket drive. As a result of the 2 drownings at the Knolls, the parents are doing an effort to put some boxes down there that are a take a life jacket or borrow a life jacket kind of an idea. What we would like to do as a commission is do a drive to collect as many life jackets as we can. 2 of the marinas right now have a loaner program for life jackets, but if we were able to collect enough, we could have that implemented at all of our marinas and potentially provide some additional life jackets down at the Knolls where the 2 fatalities originated. But we would really love to make it easy for people, especially people that aren't necessarily on a boat. If you're in a boat, it's more known that it is law that you have enough life jackets for all of the folks on the boat. But when people are going in and out on a air mattress or in an inner tube, most don't realize that they're also supposed to be having a life jacket, and that while it may be not law if within 50, if they stay within a 50-foot boundary of the shoreline, it still is an unpredictable lake, and people can get caught off guard in a windy situation or what have you, and we would love to be able to provide those so that it makes it easy for them to be safer. So we'll reach out to the board and try to share that message. We'll do a big collection on a couple days, or maybe set up some boxes in the cities where we could collect those. I'm pretty sure that most folks have a collection of life jackets that they use, and a collection that are the ones that they still own that they don't use anymore. And I think that we could probably collect a lot with relative ease and make those available. Okay, Sam, do you want to talk about the Adopt a Shoreline?
Yeah, and then if it's okay, I can transition right into the communication stuff?
Yep.
Okay. So we wanted to mostly just notify the board of some great success with the Adopt a Shoreline program. For anyone who may not be aware, the Adopt a Shoreline functions very similar to Adopt a Highway. People adopt a public access point at Utah Lake, and they keep it free of litter. They help monitor it. They can report larger items or vandalism or other things that might need to be addressed as well. So on the map that you can see on the screen, there are currently 27 public access points at the lake, and 26 of those 27 are adopted. We encountered that situation about a month ago and had at the same time, very high amount of interest. I think at one point in a 2-week period, I received 20 or 25 emails in my inbox asking to participate in the Adopt a Shoreline program. And a big part of that is thanks to the program being approved through Division of Wildlife Resources for dedicated hunter hours. The hunters can participate in the program and help keep this habitat clean for the wildlife and for recreation, and can receive credit for that. So we made a few adjustments to the program in order to be able to utilize the additional volunteers who are wanting to participate. So it's a little bit difficult to see on the map, but in the area of Lincoln Point down on the south side of the lake, we've added in a couple of areas of shoreline where the county recently acquired land. Up in Saratoga Springs, there are several sections of trail that are being added to it that are publicly accessible for people to be able to maintain the shoreline along those trails. Inlet Park is an area that's seen it's a large access at the lake and has seen a lot of use, and hence usually a higher amount of litter. And so we've added up a couple of areas at that access point instead of just one. And then in Vineyard as well, along the shoreline there where the trails have been completed and a new city park has been added on the shoreline, we also added areas that can be adopted long-term there too. So this year, when people reach out to us, not only can they adopt access points that have not been adopted, a few of the access points will have multiple groups caring for them that have higher needs. People can adopt the sections of trail or shoreline that we've delineated on the map, or we also have the option where they can go where is most needed. Just a few days ago, we had a group report to us that there were a bunch of large items they weren't able to handle. And then I was out in the area visiting Lincoln Point and found a few pieces of furniture, unfortunately, that had been abandoned there. And so we put it out to the group and said, does anybody have a truck and can go get these right away in order to remove these items? And I think within 3 hours, we had a response from someone saying they'd go out the next day. So we're really excited to see that in the last 4 years, we went from one access point adopted to now almost all 27 and needing to add additional areas that can be adopted. So we're really excited to see that that's seen so much success. As far as communications go, I did already hit on the podcast briefly. These numbers are a little bit more up to date. Like I said, we're at over 2,100 plays across the episodes that have been released. We listed out a few of the top episodes on this slide just to show where interest has been mostly with listeners. Not surprised to see that the future of Utah Lake is one that's the most popular. Fishing at the lake is obviously a popular topic as well. In fact, the 19th episode, which we launched this morning, was actually with Mike Packer from DWR, came and actually talked about catfish. How and where to catch a big catfish at Utah Lake. So we're really excited to see how well that episode performs. And then there's some other topics, other stories that are covered that people are interested in, the projects, the history of the lake, and the recreation topics. We have a lot of additional episodes lined up with project proponents, with recreation enthusiasts. We'll actually be interviewing several kiteboarders in a couple of weeks. We're working on setting that up in order to talk about kiteboarding down at Lincoln Beach and Sandy Beach. They're excited to talk with us about that. So we're really excited that, with this newest effort, having just started in February, that although the audience is still small with it being new, it's definitely on an upward trend, and we're really hopeful that this is a great way for people to get 20 to 30 minutes usually, sometimes a little bit longer, of information about the lake at their convenience. Because our staff can't be everywhere all the time and be able to answer questions and share information. But more often than not, when people take that time and have the chance to learn a little bit more, they come to love the lake, and also they definitely get their questions answered in a way and in a source that they can trust. The last thing I wanted to report on to the board about outreach is that we are in the process of developing an official framework for our outreach program. Up to this point, we've definitely worked well as a staff, but at least personally, a lot of it's been in my head of what I think my goals might be, or what we'd like to accomplish within the objectives of the commission. And so we have been working with a volunteer to basically put this all down on paper, to develop a mission and key objectives, which I put on there, are likely going to be centering around the sharing of information to enable people to have a good experience at the lake and improve the general public perception of Utah Lake. As Eric often mentions, our staff has long been of the opinion that if people can just get down to the lake and have a good experience, they come away loving the lake and wanting to visit again, instead of relying on whatever perceptions they may have developed or rumors they may have heard. It really helps to help people get the right information and get down there and have a good time. We will have the outreach program will be developed around those three main pillars of communication and education efforts. So that includes all of our digital resources, our educational programs, and doing booths and education efforts like we talked about. The community events that we offer, the Utah Lake Festival, the field trips, and other new events. And then obviously volunteerism, helping people to participate not only in the Adopt a Shoreline program, but for instance, we had a volunteer help us with the development of this outreach program. We have another volunteer working on writing blog posts for us, and trying to work with people who want to give back and who do care about the lake, and want to volunteer their services. So it's been great to work with them. Another reason why we wanted to develop the framework is to better assess the impact, to better use the analytics and the statistics that we gather and be able to report back, as we did in this year's annual report, numbers to show the value in the efforts that we're making and the effect that they're having with the community. So we will continue to evaluate and develop future initiatives and decide what the program needs are in order to best cater it to be efficient and effective in accomplishing those goals.
Thank you.
Okay. Boy, lots going on at Utah Lake. Thank you. I think those are some great reports. Any questions on just that last item and all the information we received? Or additions, maybe. Okay. I'm just going to check with Sam again to see if we won anybody or if we lost anybody, because I think it's time we'll just go right up to the item number 2. We definitely, with an hour into this, we'll have to think of a...
So we are now at 11. Chris Condi from Lehigh joined. So we will send out via email afterwards for additional votes.
Okay. So I'm going to move up to number 2 on the agenda. These are the action items for today. Action item 2A is the governing board minutes from May 21st of 2020. That was held virtually. Remember, right? Is there any questions on the minutes of that meeting? And if not, I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion by Carrie Malkovich.
I'll second.
Second by Lon Lott. Any questions on the minutes? Pause for a minute. Seeing none, I'll call for a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. All right, I am, I didn't really talk to Eric about this, public hearing, before we have a vote on the budget. Is there anybody there? We have about a half a dozen people that are here present. Is anybody here to make public comment concerning the budget? Is there anybody on the meeting that would like to make public comment concerning the proposed budget? Okay. Eric, why don't you just, if we had a tentative budget, and we talked about a few things on that budget, and we have made some changes to that. Maybe you can just give us the high level and what those are, Eric, and
Sure.
if there's any questions, we'll
So the only changes to the budget from the tentative budget is as per the request of some of the governing board members, we instead of having an increase to the contribution amount for municipalities and partners, we zeroed that increase so that this year's contribution will be the exact same as it was last year, and we made up for that in the needed increase by just using some of our rolled over general fund dollars from last year or from this year. So otherwise that remains the same. And also just to clarify that we will likely have just a little bit of rollover from our capital projects fund this year getting paid out to finish up a contract that we have. It's obligated funds, but just to let you know that those will be expended probably in July to finish up our Utah Lake soils assessment. So that's all that we have for changes from the tentative budget that was proposed.
Okay.
Question, just on membership contributions, are any of the cities that are currently not members, did they just not renew, or have they not been members prior?
Two of them were members and are no longer members.
Right.
Mapleton and Santaquin.
All right, any comments, discussion amongst ourselves concerning the budget for fiscal year 2021?
On the increase of wages and benefits, is that a one-time, or is that going to be a continuing thing? How did that increase occur?
The increase in that largely is our desire to have interns. So we do summer interns or summer paid interns, and that gives a little bit of wiggle room so that we're able to do that.
So additional employees then basically is what that is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Good question. Okay. All right, if there's no other concerns, questions, I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the proposed budget for fiscal year 2021 as proposed.
Okay, have a motion by Councilmember Lott from Alpine,
I'll second.
second by Councilmember Malcolm
Oh, there's somebody.
from Woodland Hills. And I think with this being, you know, such a big thing that we do every year, I think it would be wise to go through a roll call vote rather than just an A on who we have present. So we have a very accurate account on who is responding. So Sam, why don't you, as we state your name, if you would just answer in the nay or the yay on the fiscal year 2021 budget.
So Lon Lott,
Yay.
Brad Frost,
Yes.
Denise Anderson with Cedar Hills. Do you want me to just go through the ones I know confirmed, or do you want me to read everyone? Should ask.
Let's go through who you know who's on the call.
So Chris Finlinson with Central Utah Water. I believe she's still on. Chris, can you hear me? Sorry, I should clarify, Chris Finlinson, because we have a couple Chris's now. Should I circle back to her?
Yep.
Okay. Brian Steed.
Yes.
Thank you, Erica Gaddis.
Yes.
Brian Cottam.
Yes.
Chris Condi.
Yes.
Michelle Kafusi.
Yes.
Chris Karn.
Yes.
Lori Backus.
Yes.
And Carrie Malkovich.
Yes.
Is there anybody on the board present that I've missed? Chris Finlinson, I didn't hear a reply from her. I don't know if there's anyone else I'm missing.
Okay. So give us a count, Sam. How many is that?
So of the 11 board members present, we have 10 confirms, Chris.
Okay. So what we will do at this point is we will outreach to those on the board concerning this item and the approval of the minutes, because we'll need a quorum, and we will solicit their response through an email, and then we will have it reportable into our next meeting. Okay. So, okay. Thank you for that. All right. We'll move on to item number 6. And Erica will let you lead out on this.
Great. Is the echo on?
It is.
Okay, I'm still hearing an echo feedback, but I'm gonna just turn my phone down. Hope you can still hear me.
This is Chris Finlinson. Can you hear me now?
I can, yes, Chris.
We'll let you go back and
For some
vote,
reason,
Chris.
Let's unmute my call.
That's okay. I assume that's a yay then for the budget?
Yes, approval of the budget.
Okay, thank you. All right, Erica, you should be okay to start on your presentation there
Great,
now.
thank you. I have 2 topics on the agenda today. I want to just give a short update on the Utah Lake Water Quality Study. And then talk a little bit more about some changes in our stormwater program. And then if there's time, I'd like to just brief the commission on some work we've been doing with wastewater treatment plants throughout the state on COVID-19. So water quality study update, we're moving along. We've been having a lot of active meetings with the steering committee and the science panel. I think the thing that's most important to raise with the Utah Lake Commission is our work to develop Utah Lake water quality management goals. This is really an effort to try and frame the study further so that when we bring our results back to you as elected officials and managers of Utah Lake, there's a really clear idea of how water quality improvements might affect the uses of the lake. And the 3 uses that we protect Utah Lake for are aquatic life, the warm water fishery, and waterfowl, recreation, and agricultural and secondary water uses. So we've been working really diligently with our steering committee to develop basically goals or statements about the desired condition of Utah Lake that are then given to the science panel so that they can model out various scenarios of what an improved or changed Utah Lake might look like. I'll remind everybody that ultimately we will bring our study back to this commission to really debate. Okay, Eric says I'm not in presentation mode. Is that a setting on Google Hangouts, Eric?
It's usually just on your screen. It should let you click presentation mode, like on the bottom right corner normally.
Yeah.
This is fine as well. We can still see it.
Okay. Well, it's in presentation mode on my side.
Ah, okay. Yeah, this happened to me the other day as well.
Let me try this. Yeah.
Yep, that worked.
Let me try this. I'll just do it this way. So ultimately, we'll bring the study back to this group to really evaluate the costs and benefits of water quality improvement. And just as a reminder to the group, this is very much a policy decision that should be informed by our science panel, but ultimately needs to be made at the policy level, and we think the Utility Commission is the right body to help guide that decision. So on the cost side, we're talking about increased potential costs for nutrient removal at our wastewater treatment plants, our stormwater systems. There could be more incentive dollars needed to reduce non-point source or unregulated sources of nutrients, such as agricultural sources, and then habitat restoration. And then on the benefit side would be improvements to public health, aquatic life, recreation, and secondary water. So just kind of running to reframe that for you. We plan to bring this list of management goals and targets back to the commission in September. We're still working through it in more detail with the steering committee. Just to give you a flavor of what you're likely to see, you'll see a table that frames something like this. This is just an example. Again, we're still working through the details. Where we might have, for example, a goal that's specific to native and sport fish populations, or those goals may be slightly different for those two types of fish. And then we would have measures that we know are supportive of those with respect to water quality, in this case, dissolved oxygen. Okay, that's what's happening here. Okay, does that work? There we go. Recreation, we're really looking at two different measures. There's the toxins produced by harmful algae or cyanobacteria, as well as some measure of the spatial and kind of frequency extent of harmful algal blooms. So you might see a management goal, for example, that algal blooms will not create toxins that threaten public health, or you might see one, for example, that says we want to limit the spatial extent and frequency to support a robust recreational industry and community. Some of these things will be numeric targets. You can see here EPA guidance gives us a target for microcystins. For example, we can ask our science panel to model various scenarios to ensure that we are achieving that protective target. Others, such as the extent of algal blooms, are a little bit more subjective. So our idea is that those would be reported out in metric form only without a predetermined numeric target. That will allow you to compare scenarios ultimately in that cost-benefit context. We have had a fair bit of debate within the steering committee. There are some decisions that will need to be made in terms of what we ask the science panel to model. Big picture, we will at least ask them to model a scenario that is a current trajectory. So as the county grows, if we do nothing, what will the lake look like in terms of continued water quality degradation? What might it be? What might it take to maintain the current water quality conditions in utility as the county grows? And then a third scenario obviously would be some level of improvement, and we'll probably have more than one option in terms of improvements that we want to see answers for, so that we can put those into that cost benefit context for you to consider. So just a reminder, kind of how the study is set up. We've got the science panel and steering committee working diligently on some of these questions, and we think we'll be ready to bring some of them back to the commission in September. That really is just framing up kind of the final modeling that we're asking the science panel to do, but again, so that when we have results, we can use them to make our best policy decisions. We're hoping that we get consensus within the steering committee. If we don't, we're committed to bringing both the majority opinion and minority opinions forward for your considerations, and that there's a good transparent process there. That's all I've really got on the study. Just a couple other notes. We have several projects that are ongoing that the science panel has initiated, and two others that are getting started this fall. The RFPs for those will go out here shortly. So those projects are a paleo study that looks kind of historically at what Utah Lake water quality and ecology may have looked like through cores, sediment cores. Some bioassays that are being conducted by Zach Andrew at BYU, really looking at what happens when you increase or decrease nutrient concentrations directly into Utah Lake water and algae in terms of how much control you can have on algal blooms through a nutrient, policy lever. And then we've got a couple projects looking at sediment, water, biogeochemistry. The PSCWs around the lake, the Wasatch Front Water Quality Council, is funding a separate study looking at the deposition of phosphorus and nitrogen from atmospheric forces. So that's ongoing as well. We think that collectively those projects will probably use up the rest of our budget that we originally received from the Water Quality Board, $1 million, as well as the $500,000 from the legislature. So once those projects are finalized, we'll have to decide whether to move the study more internally to DWQ and have staff do some of this work, or seek additional funding. So we're already looking at ways to try and leverage other funding sources. If there's any funding left over this summer from those other projects, we would like to restore some of the harmful algal bloom monitoring for Utah Lake that we lost when we lost our appropriation from the legislature in March for that statewide program. I will say that we are actively working to try and restore the harmful algal bloom program funds this week with the interim session. And if that's a program that's been valuable to you or your constituents, we appreciate your help in reaching out to legislators to let them know that that's a valuable program for public health protection. Other than that, that's all I really have as an update on the water quality study. I can jump over to stormwater unless there are questions from the commission.
I can unmute if anybody has a question.
Let's go ahead. So let me just, let's just be clear on the reporting of the blooms, Erica, and I know the session is going on today, correct, with the legislature? Okay, so currently, I'm just gonna go off what I have read, basically media sources, is that the funding has been cut. We have signs that is in place to inform people about them, but no real formal process has happened to actually put out the warnings and things that they've seen in the past, kind of that trend. Are you saying that based upon maybe what comes out of today, that will continue, or are you asking if that's something that we would like to continue in the future?
Both. So yes, based on what happened in executive appropriations today, we may be able to restore that funding. So what we're not able to do, I'm not able to hire the technicians that I typically do for the summer to drive around the state and collect water quality samples to test for harmful algal blooms and toxins. And I don't have the funding to pass on to the local health departments to do that work either. Nor do we have the funding to actually run the samples for some of those constituents. So yes, there will be no reporting. You may recall in the past we have a website where you can kind of click on different water bodies around the state, different state parks, and see what the algal bloom conditions are. We won't be able to provide any of that information this year because that program was defunded in March.
Okay, thank you.
So we're hoping to restore the funding, and that would be an executive appropriations decision.
Thank you very much. Any other questions for Erica?
Okay.
She might have missed that last bit. It was on mute for a second.
All right.
We'll let her do the stormwater.
Okay, any questions on this portion of Erica's presentation so far? So we can kind of stay on task with water quality. If not, we'll move on to stormwater.
Okay, great.
Love these kind of meetings.
Okay, feedback. All right, I'm going to skip down here to stormwater. I've been wanting to update the commission for a few months now on our stormwater program and some new initiatives that will affect some of your cities. Just starting off, first of all, what is stormwater? This is the water that runs off the landscape during storm and melt events. You can see during a pre-development condition, about 10% of what falls as rain onto a forested or vegetated area will run off into our streams, and about half of it infiltrates down into the subsurface, into groundwater. Once we develop and we create these impervious surfaces that don't allow that infiltration, we tend to see closer to half to 60% of the water running off. And when it runs off, it picks up all kinds of various pollutants, whether it's oils and grease or fertilizers from lawns to dog waste. All of that ends up in the river. We can think of stormwater as generally discharged without much treatment. There's a little bit of retention that drops out some of the sediment, but a lot of the concerning pollutants are discharged without real treatment. Unlike our wastewater treatment plants that treat the sewage coming out of our homes, that's water that's well treated and disinfected before it's discharged into a river. The conventional stormwater management thinking has been, until recently, to basically collect, convey, and discharge stormwater. And that's largely driven by flood control concerns that are important and need to be, continue to be managed for. So that water gets, flushed off of our homes, into our curbs and gutters, and then down into storm drains and out into our water bodies. Here's a photo of some oil and grease and some other debris going through a storm system. So the impact of stormwater on our waters is multiple. Like I said, we get trash, we get nutrients, we have heavy metals, E. coli from pet waste, oil and grease, and sediment. And it is a real problem here in Utah. That in Jordan River, more than half of the pollution that's causing some of the problems in the lower Jordan River are generated from stormwater sources. We don't yet have a good handle on what that proportion will be for Utah Lake. That will be part of the water quality study that we'll be releasing when we finish our work with the science panel and steering committee. I don't think my animation is going to work here today. Maybe I can just do this. So you can see that the growth in Utah County is substantial, fastest growing county in the state, one of the fastest growing in the country. The red here are the urban areas in 2010, based on land use in 2010. And by 2050, you can see how much more urban area we will have. That's a substantially larger amount of impervious surface that can then has the potential to generate more pollution into Utah Lake through a stormwater source. So we manage and permit stormwater through a number of different programs. We have a program that deals with construction sites where there's the potential to mobilize a lot of sediment. We have our industrial and commercial program that ensures that anything spilled in an industrial setting is not getting washed into our streams. But what I want to focus on today is the residential program that we have, which is largely implemented through cities, many of which sit on this commission. These are all hidden in my active presentation. So we are experiencing a philosophy change with respect to how we engineer our stormwater systems. And I have to say, one of the leaders in the state, probably the leader in the state on this, is the city of Spanish Fork, where they really embrace a rethink of how to manage stormwater, both from a flood control and a water quality perspective. So whereas the previous strategy has been to collect and dispose of it as quickly as possible, the new strategy is to attempt to retain as much stormwater as is feasible at its source, to try and mimic that more natural hydrologic cycle to infiltrate the water. That reduces the amount of pollution that ends up in our streams and lakes because there's a lot less water flushing off of these impervious surfaces and picking up those pollutants along the way. So this is sometimes called green infrastructure or low impact development, which is basically an approach where we try to mimic that pre-development hydrology by creating practices that infiltrate and filter and store stormwater at its source, especially for the really small storms. The big storms, there still has to be, of course, a mechanism to move that water away from our residential areas to protect for floods. So just a couple examples of what that might look like. This is a conventional stormwater design of a street, and this would be an example of a low impact development. So you can see the differences here. You don't have that same sharp curve. You channel water towards your parking strip areas where possible, and you try to infiltrate that water. You can see down here a grate that still allows for some of it to move out into the street or into that next parking strip so that you don't end up with flood issues. This is our parking lot, conventional design. It's at DEQ, not very innovative. It really is just a rethinking of how you contour the space that you're developing to achieve a little bit more infiltration. This is a low impact development parking lot. You can see a difference here is pretty simple. You still have the vegetated areas in between parking stalls, but you've got curb cuts here that allow water to flow into these vegetated areas and infiltrate into the subsurface, rather than in that conventional design where it goes into a grate and is flushed straight out to a river. Conventional street design, and this is actually a real example of a pre and post project. So here you've got vegetation in the sidewalks, that some of the water from the sidewalks is channeled into these vegetated areas so that water can infiltrate. The benefits of low impact development include water quality, some measure of flood control, and Spanish Fort has certainly experienced that, shade, traffic calming, increased property values. Obviously there's a cost to this. For the most part, we've found that it's somewhat cost neutral if cities allow a rethink of their flood control requirements. So if you're requiring that builders design for flood control using the old conventional approach, and then you're also requiring a low impact development approach, that can become more costly. And that really was the subject of a lot of debate in our most recent permit issuance and the last legislative session. So I won't go through all of this, only to say that we've been working on this since 2015, and we just signed a revised permit for all of the cities in Utah that implement our MS4 stormwater program in March of 2020. That included a lot of negotiation and discussions about how to implement low impact development approaches in Utah, to what extent to give flexibility to builders, and how to maintain flexibility for cities. So ultimately, we worked with the land use task force just in the 6 months leading up to this last legislative session to try to work out how to incorporate this idea of low impact development and post-construction stormwater retention into our permit. Our initial permit that was signed in 2016 required that the 80th percentile storm be retained on site. Or sorry, the 90th percentile storm. That's about a ½ inch storm, just a little bit more, a 0.6 inch storm. Based on that, there were a lot of stakeholder concerns raised, and we deferred implementation of that requirement for about 4 years to try and resolve those concerns. Concerns raised by the builders were obviously the cost, and then a lot of concern about inconsistent application across the city. That every city they develop in, and I'm sure you've probably heard this in other contexts, are different, and that makes it very difficult for builders to do consistent and efficient design. They wanted some clarification of where there would be exemptions from this permit requirement. The municipalities represented by the League of Cities and Towns had concerns about low impact development maintenance and who would be responsible for that maintenance. They have obviously the desire to maintain flexibility about what types of practices they want to see in their cities. And then there was a concern raised about retraining city staff and enforceability. At the same time, we were getting a lot of pressure from EPA for the 4-year extension that we kept, that we continued with. And so those really was putting the real pressure on us to find a solution last year, which I think we have. So we developed a low impact development manual to try and address some of the concerns about what's feasible in Utah and some of the training concerns for both builders and for cities. And as I said, we worked with the Land Use Task Force and made the following revisions to try as a compromise to all of the concerns that were heard. So we changed the retention volume from the 90th percentile to the 80th percentile, so that is about a half-inch storm would need to be retained on site using a number of different practices. Our low impact development manual outlines 13 different practices that can be used to achieve that goal. But we brought in the definition of what would be considered inflexible to include excessive costs that would be negotiated with builders and cities directly. To try and balance the desire for flexibility for cities with the desire from builders to have certainty, we're requiring now that all cities identify at least 5 practices that would be allowed within their cities. They can choose which 5 those are. There was a change made for redevelopment areas. These new permit requirements are only for new development and redevelopment. The redevelopment is handled very differently now. It's just looking at a net increase in impervious cover rather than the absolute that's used for new development. We also worked out an appeals process, that there must be an appeals process, that all cities must have that for builders to access. And we made some accommodations for inspection frequency and reporting requirements for cities to reduce the burden on some of their staff so that they had the capacity and resources to accommodate this new permit requirement. Even though we went through a 6-month negotiation with the home builders and the League of Cities and Towns, we still landed ourselves with some legislation on this topic last session. The initial legislation would have invalidated all of our stormwater permits and was not really a workable piece of legislation. So we spent a good bit of time with a couple legislators and the home builders and the League of Cities and Towns to work out these 2 new pieces of our statute. So the first requires that the Water Quality Board make rules that are specific to the permitting of stormwater discharges. We already do that, but I think it's fair to say that those rules are pretty well buried in our permitting rules. So we'll make those a little bit more transparent and daylight them. And then the second is a new piece of legislation that requires cities to account for low impact development practices and flood control. This is in an effort to try not to compound the cost of new development for builders. And that they established in legislation and statute now an appeals process for builders if they feel that cities have been unfair in the low impact development design that a builder has proposed for a particular site. And the division will maintain a list of those qualified engineers that can be accessed through an appeals process. So that's what I've got on stormwater. That was kind of a race on a very complex topic, but I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
I have one. Does this stormwater address water collection by a homeowner who might want to collect stormwater on their own place?
Yes, that is one of the 13 practices. So collecting in like a rain barrel or cistern or something, water to then be used for irrigation of your landscape. That is one practice that is identified in our LID manual. There are some water rights limitations to how much of that you can do. I don't have those at my fingertips, but for most homeowners, it's well within what they would want to collect.
as well then on the aspect of redevelopment, when we have some of the homes in our city that redo their landscaping and that, are they going to be required to meet the current 80 percentile collection or
So I should have been more clear about what the permit requirement really is. This only applies to new development or redevelopment that disturbs more than 1 acre.
okay.
So a typical homeowner on a relatively small lot, this won't affect with respect to redevelopment. So we're looking for those larger, new developments largely. The redevelopment would really be for, if you're redeveloping a large section of your downtown. And in that case, the 80th percentile only applies to the net increase in impervious cover. So if you have an acre plot and half of it was previously paved and you want to pave the other half, we would ask you to retain the 80th percentile on the new half that you're going to pave. If that makes sense.
It does, thank you.
Yeah.
Erica, this is Mayor Frost. So this new legislation and what we've talked about, is it been triggered? And I know this is something I could ask my staff, my engineers, but is there a trigger date or is it effective immediately? Because we're going through an impact fee.
July 1st.
Okay, July 1st. So we're going through an impact fee analysis study, and this could have a lot of bearing on your impact fees with your stormwater. So July 1.
And I would recommend those of you that are looking at implementing this to definitely talk with Spanish Fork. They've been doing this for about 10 years and have seen actually reductions in their impact fees because of the reduced costs that they need for stormwater conveyance for flood control. But it requires, in their case, it's a complete rethink of how to manage stormwater in their city. So some cities may go that direction and others may want to add this on as a to provide a little bit more flexibility than maybe Spanish Fork has. They have a very specific set of practices they ask developers to follow. But I would say that it's not a foregone conclusion that these practices necessarily will increase impact fees depending on how you choose to implement them.
Okay. Thank you. All right, any other questions for Erica? All right, thank you, Erica. That was very informative.
Thank you.
All right, item number seven is just to make you aware of basically when we will meet for the rest of the year. We have a meeting scheduled for September 17th and December 10th. And maybe December 10th it'll be a Christmas party, who knows? Virtually. Hopefully not.
Hopefully not.
All right, any other general comments from the board? And I'll just open up to anybody else that's here in the public before we close.
One behind you.
Oh,
Soren.
Hi.
hi. Could you just state your name for the record?
Yes, absolutely. My name is Soren Simonson. I'm Eric's counterpart, the executive director of the Jordan River Commission, and just try and sit in on your meetings periodically as often as I can to see what's going on. Obviously, Utah Lake is one of the major tributaries to the Jordan River, so a lot of the things that affect the lake affect the river as well. We're pleased to be part of this big watershed. One very quick comment, you are probably aware of this, but during the legislative session, there was a piece of legislation passed called the Utah Watershed Council Act. And that establishes a number of watershed councils potentially across the state, as well as a statewide watershed council. We are exploring how the Jordan River Commission may become a certified watershed council for the Jordan River watershed, which also includes Utah Lake as a major tributary. So we may be, as that moves forward, we may end up becoming a little bit more joined at the hip, if you will, with Utah Lake formally through that watershed council. Mainly just wanted to make you aware that our commission is very interested in serving that role and capacity as a watershed council for the Jordan River and its tributaries. And we look forward to potentially partnership with you as that endeavor moves forward. I think we have a year period for those various watershed councils, including the state council, to be established through the Department of Natural Resources. So we'll keep you informed, and I'll work closely with Eric, who also serves on our governing board, as to progress as that moves forward. Thank you. I appreciate all the good work you're doing. It's exciting to see progress on many fronts. And like you, we're challenged with some of the same cuts in legislative funding and appropriations and other things. We're dealing with that, but we love the trail that's emerging that's linking the Jordan River Parkway Trail with the Utah Lake Trail system. And I also wanted to mention to you, if you're interested, we are conducting our 3rd annual Golden Spoke event. This was an event that started 2 years ago in May as a celebration of the completion of the Jordan River Parkway Trail, but also recognizes other trails that it connects to, the Provo River Trail, the Murdoch Canal Trail, and expanding trail networks in northern Utah County. That event will be held kind of virtually this year. We're not going to stage a big gathering, but September 19th is our official date. We'll be publishing information over the next couple of months about that. We are linking to trails in Eagle Mountain, Saratoga Springs, Utah Lake Trail, the Murdoch Canal Trail, as well as others in Salt Lake, Weaver, and Davis County. So watch for more information. We'd love to have you help promote and encourage people to participate in that event in September. Thanks very much. I'll turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, any other comments? Yeah. Why don't you come right here so they can see your face, and then just state your name.
Okay, yeah, I'm Sean Thornton. I'm a developer. I'm the one that developed Windy Lookout. It's the app that probably many of you have heard about. I really appreciate the Utah Lake Commission working with Eric and Sam to help promote that. We have seen, since the app was released back in March, we've seen over 1,200 downloads. We probably have about 400 to 500 weekly users using the app. And for those of you who may be not aware of the app, basically we're detecting high wind events all around Utah County, even up to Salt Lake, all the way down to Nephi, to Mona. And essentially anytime we detect any wind events that are headed toward the lake that could potentially cause a dangerous situation, we send out alerts, whether it's mobile notifications or text alerts. So anyway, I wanted to thank everyone for that. If people have questions, we're trying to work with Eric and Sam right now to see if we can help enhance and improve the app and see what kind of partnership or what possibilities there are. So we look forward to working with the Utah Lake Commission and doing that. If anyone has any questions or anything, I've been willing to talk about it.
Can you tell us your name again?
Yeah, it's Sean Thornton.
Sean.
Yep. And I can leave I should have written my email down there. I can leave my email there. I do have some informational things if people want to take them here, I can email them out.
Can I have a second for a question?
You bet.
So yesterday, we talked about this in the technical committee meeting, and we had a fantastic question come up, and that was, when the alert is issued, if the app shows a map, can it potentially show them the quickest access point to get off the lake?
So like, yeah, give
From
them
where
a
they're
GPS,
geolocated?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, these are all like, there's been tons of, I guess you'd say, from feedback from people what we'd like to do to continue to move it forward. But yeah, that would be definitely, we could look into using GPS notification services. We could even use GPS notification services to alert maybe the people at the Utah Lake State Park so they know who is out on the lake, or if people want to share their information. We've had ideas about that, as well as like, active lightning tracking and storm cell tracking. There's a lot of things that we would like to do to help improve it. We've already gotten a lot of good feedback. Our average right now about when a wind event happens to when it actually hits the perimeter of Utah Lake, we usually give on average, it's about 30 minutes, 35 minutes advance notice to actually inform people, hey, winds are picking up, to help people make the right decisions. So anyway, that.
I think it would be really helpful because the lake is so big and you might get in on one end but be all the way at the other end when the wind happens and not really know where the next access point is. And so
Yep.
if we had that on there to show them the closest, they could at least get to shore.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so again, we're exploring with Eric and Sam what possibilities we can help in trying to help support this fully going forward, whether through grants or through funding, or what we can do to kind of help do that. As of right now, I'm just the only one bearing the cost for it. So, and I'm willing to. I mean, I want to pitch in. I want to give back to the community, but there are some costs associated. So, anyway.
I think it's great. I'll have a question, and
Yeah.
that is, where are you getting the data?
So right now, yeah, so that we don't use, so the National Weather Service has weather stations.
Right.
We typically do not pull from those, and the reason why we don't pull from those is there's a open API kind of out there called MADIS. It stands for something, I don't remember what. But we don't pull from them because they're usually 25 to 30 minutes outdated, meaning the information I get from them could be 30 minutes behind. In which case, if you're out on the lake, 30 minutes is too late, right? So where we're getting most of our information right now is we're crowdsourcing it from a variety of partners through personal weather stations that people already have that make the data publicly available. And so we're always looking to add better stations to kind of give us a better coverage, especially in remote areas where it's a little bit harder to get access to. But that's kind of where we're at currently. There are other data sources that we could start to utilize. Unfortunately, they're just out of our budget right now to be able to use them.
We have two, we probably, I don't know where you pulled, but we have two wind sources that are pretty fast. I think what every 5 minutes.
It might be 10.
The one in American Fork Boat Harbor, and then down at Milepost 17 through UDOT that
Yeah.
we worked with to get installed with fast uploads.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
there's at
and
least
it-
those 2 points that are quick.
And it depends and I'd be more than willing and wanting to know where they're sending that information to, because if it's sending it to the National Weather Service, it may be sending it at that rate, but by the time they compile it from all across the nation and then make that available to the public, they're about 30 minutes behind.
I think we have access to
So
the
if you have direct
data
access,
feed.
then
Yeah.
I'd be very interested into seeing how we can get that information.
So how are people finding out about this app, Sean, besides that our
So most of the coverage,
Signage.
yeah, we have social media. We're looking to put up signs in the marinas and alerting people. We were featured on KSL back in
Commission
May.
has put out news as well. in our
So-
newsletter.
The signage that's going to go on at the entrance of all the marinas that talks about the VHF radios also has a link to or a description of the Windy app or Windy Lookout app as well on that.
Perfect. Because I was just looking at wind apps and I had to ask Sam because there's 100 of them.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
to find out which one is actually yours would be, we wouldn't want to confuse people, so.
Yep, definitely.
You got a 4.9 star rating.
Yeah, we're doing good. The feedback's been overwhelmingly positive. We've even got back testimonials from people saying, hey, I was out on the lake and this helped me get out of a tricky situation. So it's been great.
Awesome.
Thank you
Yep.
very much. Okay, just a reminder of our next meeting will be September 17th, and we'll definitely keep you up to date on what that will be. We would hope that we could all be together, but we'll look at the conditions of that day with the pandemic. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion to adjourn, second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Have a great day.